Hello everyone, and I am really happy that you have chosen to watch this video. This will be part number 4 of the English Grammar Review for the B1 Plus course or intermediate level of the English language. And we are going over 4 different grammar topics. They range from, the passive, then we're going to talk about the relative clauses, and then we're going to talk about second conditionals and third conditionals. So without further ado, let's start. Okay, so the passive voice, guys, is a way of writing sentences, okay? In a way, we write them that the subject has the action done to it by the agent rather than, doing the action itself, meaning that the main focus will be on, the action, or at least the receiver in this case, which is going to be the subject. The agent, who in a way is the doer of the action itself, who is not that much focused upon or focused on. We use the passive voice also when we want to change the focus of the sentence, or when we don't know or don't want to say who or what does the action. And we form the passive. So if you're interested in knowing how we can form it, we form the passive using the verb be plus the past participle. In simpler terms, even you just can call it a verb number 3, a verb number 3, be plus verb number 3, which is even better and easier to understand. If I write it for you, it will be like this, okay? So some examples, or at least one, just to, make you guys understand this. If you have an active voice like this, like she wrote a book, she wrote a book. She is the subject, okay? She is, the subject of the sentence. Then you have wrote, which is going to be the verb of the sentence, and a book is going to be called the object of this sentence. So if I just, okay, not that color, let's go with purple, something like that. So she is the subject and the agent as well, and book is the object. So if you now change it to the passive voice, you're bringing that, object of the active sentence at the beginning and call it the new subject. So we're going to say a book was written. So was written, how did you take that, or how did you find that? It's very simple, actually. We are just using this structure. We're bringing the verb be, okay? So be is it in here, was, when we choose which one, like, be is a lot, right? It in different tenses, it is different, it has different forms. We use the form, or we choose the form of be based on the tense of the active sentence. So the active sentence, guys, the tense was past simple, and in here I'm bringing was, which is, a be verb in the past tense or in the past simple tense. We do also have were here, but we're not choosing were because it doesn't agree with our subject, which is a book. So we're going to choose was. And then, you might be wondering, how did we choose the verb 3, which is even simpler, guys. We just look at the main verb of the active sentence. And we just look at the main verb of the active sentence, and then when we write it in the passive sentence, we just choose its third form. Okay, so a book was written. And at the very end, you have something else called by her. So you might be wondering what that is. Now, by her is called a by phrase or an agent phrase, which is just like by plus the agent or the doer of that specific action. So you just say, a book was written, okay, by who? By her. So a girl wrote that book. That's what we're, in a way, fundamentally saying. Now, this part is not that important. If you don't mention it, it doesn't matter. Your sentence is still correct. But if you do want to mention it, it's just okay. So book is the subject, her is the agent, and the verb is was written as we just discussed. So some very important bullet points about a passive voice. We have mentioned them here, so let's go over each one. Okay, so we can use different tenses. Okay, what can we do, guys? We can use different tenses. Okay, let me just highlight this for you guys as well. In the passive voice, by how can we use them? So by changing the form of be. Okay, for example, the present simple passive uses is or are plus the past participle. Of course, you also have am, by the way, so but many places just don't mention it because it's the receiver. It's sorry, it's just used with the subject I, but it's still it's okay to say it. So you're using is or am plus the past participle or verb number three. The past simple passive uses was and were, as mentioned before, plus the past participle, and present perfect passive uses uses has or have been plus the past participle, and it continues. Okay, so this this kind of formula continues. All you need to do is just find the correct form of be. Okay, what to do, guys? All you have to do is just find the correct form of be, and then based on the tense, you can make your passive sentence. Past participle is always going to be past participle. Okay, so moving on, we can use modal verbs in the past voice as well. So let's just highlight that for you. We can use modal verbs. Okay, in the passive voice by adding what? By adding be plus a past participle after the modal verb. Okay, so this is where this is very important. We use it after the modal verb, and our sentence will be correct. For example, the can passive is just can plus be plus past participle. So it is very, very easy. And the same thing goes, for example, what do we have in here for must? So is must instead of can, you just put must plus be plus past participle. You can have will be plus past participle, which is actually also the future passive. And it continues with all of these other, modal verbs as well. Okay. So another point is about the omission. We can omit the agent as mentioned before. When we mention agent, we use the by phrase, by plus the noun or by plus the agent. In the passive voice when it is unknown, obvious, or unimportant. So you can just omit it. You can just delete that and just not mention it. For example, the window was broken. So if I say the sentence, no one actually knows who broke the window, and that's the point. That's the point of me using the passive. We don't know who broke it, so I'm not mentioning it. Or maybe it was, known. People know, so that's all the more reason for me not to mention it because it's too obvious. As mentioned here, even if it's obvious, we sometimes don't mention it. Okay. So, as this example also shows, the cake was made by my mother. We know who made it. So, if you just remove by my mother, many people would still get the gist. Or the documents have been signed. We don't care who signed them. So, or even if we do care, maybe we know who signed them. It's just obvious, of course. Let's say the CEO of that company signed it, so we don't have to mention it. Point three, we can, point four, I think. We can use the passive voice in subordinate clauses, okay? We can use them where, guys? Let me just highlight it. We can use the passive voice in subordinate clauses that have a subject and a verb. For example, I thought that he was invited to the party. Okay, so he was invited is a passive subordinate clause. It, of course, the main clause is I thought, and it has a that which is going to introduce the subordinate clause to us. So this is going to be the main clause. Mhm. And that he was, so he was invited is the subordinate clause using the passive. Okay. Yeah, so you can do that as well. And the last point we have about the passive voice is that we can also use the passive voice with a passive gerund, or even a passive infinitive in the same place. Let me just highlight this for you. Yeah, we can use also the passive voice with a passive gerund or a passive infinitive in the same place as a normal gerund or as a normal infinitive. Example, she loves being praised. So being praised is the passive gerund for us. Being praised is a passive gerund, and example for the passive infinitive is he wants to be promoted. So to be promoted is also passive. But what type of passive, you might be wondering? It's called a passive infinitive. It's again possible to use, you know, passive, let's say, in an infinitive form and in a gerund form as well, as illustrated by these two examples. Okay, so we are kind of done with the passive voice. If you do have any questions, of course, you can leave them in the comments or just contact me. Now let's move on to relative clauses. Now, so relative clauses, guys, we're going to talk about the two types they have, which is actually internationally accepted as it having two types. So one of them is called the defining and the other one is called the non-defining. So let's talk about them. The defining and non-defining relative clauses are clauses that give extra information. Okay, they give what? Extra information about a noun or a pronoun um, in the main clause. We use a relative pronoun like who, which, that, whose, whom, where, and when. Some people call them relative adverbs as well to, introduce a relative clause. Now, just be careful, guys. This we are mentioning it as extra information, but when we talk about it, it's gonna get divided into like essential and non-essential extra information, which will be important. So just keep that in mind. Okay, for example, she is the woman who lives next door. So who lives next door? If I just do it in here, I think it's better. Let me highlight it for you. Who lives next door is a defining relative clause that tells us which woman we are talking about. Okay, so this is extra information in a way about this woman, but is it essential? Is it not essential? That's what we're going to talk about in the bullet points category. Okay, and example two, he is my friend. He is my friend. Who is very kind? So now, who is very kind? If I just go and highlight it, who is very kind is now a non-defining, relative clause that gives us extra information about my friend, but we don't need it to identify him because everyone knows my friend, or at least I do, and the listener does. Okay, so let's just talk about it in more detail. So, I think if you just read this one, or at least focus on what I mentioned here, you already know that this one, the green highlighted relative clause, who is very kind, is a non-defining, meaning the information you get inside is not essential to the overall meaning of the sentence, while the yellow one, who lives next door, is the defining relative clause, and the information it contains is essential to the overall meaning of the sentence. But even if you didn't, we are going to talk about that in here as well. So some bullet points about defining and non-defining relative clauses are what? Okay, point one. We use defining relative clauses to give essential information. Okay, so if I just do something with it like this, I think it's going to be good. Yeah, to give essential information about the noun or pronoun, without which we can't understand the sentence. Okay, so we don't use commas in defining relative clauses, and we can use who, we can which or that or whose or whom as the relative pronoun depending on the function and the type of noun or pronoun. So I will, just highlight them for you, but I will kind of put which into a different format because we're going to talk about it. Okay. For example, we use who or that for people as the subject or the object. We use which or that for things as the subject or the object. And we use whose for possessive, and we use whom for people as the object of a preposition. Now, so these are just information about that, but if you just focus back on why I did this, is because, in many international contexts, like different books as well, they are claiming nowadays that which should not be used in the defining relative clause. And I do agree with that. I mean, which is not really okay to be used in there. If we want to talk about things that which does, talk about, we are just going to use that, and it does it much easier and also much better. So just kind of don't use this one, but I'm just writing it because some people do use it, so it's okay to know about it, but I really don't think you should use it in the defining relative clauses category. Okay, but if we do continue, guys, in here we can see some more information. We use non-defining. Okay, so now it's what? Non-defining. We use non-defining relative clauses to give extra information, and in here, just guys, be careful that this extra information is also going to be called, let's say, non-essential. Okay, non-essential information about the noun or pronoun, which we can omit without changing the meaning of the sentence, which, or hence the name non-essential. We use commas in non-defining relative clauses, by the way, and just in a way it can be indicative of the fact that this is extra and the defining ones are not extra. Kind of. They're essential to the meaning, right? So we use commas to separate the non-essential information. We can use who, we can use which, whose, whom, and where, or where or even when as the relative pronoun. And as you might have already seen and guessed here, that is not included in this list, and that is, intentional. It's because that is mainly used, and this is kind of without debate. Everyone agrees with this, that that should not be used in the relative clauses, in the non-defining relative clauses. It must only be used with the defining ones. Okay. Yeah, so we can use these ones as a relative pronoun depending on the function and the type of noun or pronoun. For example, as mentioned earlier, we use who for people as the subject or the object. We use which for things as the subject or the object. We use whose for possessive. We use whom for people as the object of a preposition as well. And we use where for place, and we use when for time as well. Okay. So simply, if you just want to remember it, the difference between whom and who, if I can find it, yeah, is kind of like who can work for a subject and object nowadays in modern English, and whom is more of a formal word. It's a bit archaic, it's a bit ancient. Nowadays, you don't see it very often, but if you do see it, it's more going to be in a formal context, and it's going to be talking about, people, but from an object perspective. Okay, so continuing now, point 3, I believe, yeah, the last one. We can omit the relative pronoun in defining relative clauses when it is this object of the verb, but we can't omit it in non-defining relative clauses. So, for example, she loves the chocolate, which I bought or that I bought. So the chocolate I bought or the chocolate yeah, the chocolate I bought, or the chocolate that I bought, or the chocolate which I bought, are all correct. But since it's a defining relative clause and chocolate is not, the subject of the defining relative clause, it's just going to be the object, we can remove the relative pronoun that is used to, introduce it, that is used to refer back to it. So that or which can be just very easily omitted, can be very easily deleted from the sentence, and the meaning still will be correct. Yeah, so she loves chocolate, which is bad for her teeth. In here, we kind of cannot remove it because firstly, it's a non-defining relative clause, and in here, also just which alone is not going to be removed that easily. Mainly, you could also argue that which is bad for her teeth kind of is not just talking about the chocolate, but it's also talking about the complete situation, which is something that which can do. It's in some places called situational, if I just write it, situational relative clauses. Okay, now I will give some information here. I think I forgot to write it before, but just know that as well. But in here, even though it's not that much of a situational relative clause, but the point is that it is non-defining relative clause. So removing, the relative pronoun which is just not going to work. And also, since which is actually acting as the subject of the clause, and we cannot remove subjects, if you remember here. We can only remove the ones that act as the object of the verb. Okay. So coming to situational relative clauses, guys, a good thing about them is that we only use which for them. We only use what? Which for them, okay? And they talk about situations. They don't talk about just a noun. So if you check in here, see, he is my friend who is very kind. So this who, or this clause completely, is talking about my friend. Who lives next door, all the clause, or just who, is talking about the woman. So just one noun. But if you come here in situational relative clauses, they kind of talk about, a situation, like what happened. An example could be like, if I just write it for you, let's say Taylor um, bought an bought a new car, which made her dad very angry. So now, which made her dad very angry is a relative clause. But what type, if people ask, it's better to just call it a situational relative clause, okay? Because it's not just talking about the new car. The new car did not, make her dad angry. The whole situation, that Taylor going out, and buying a new car, that made the father angry. So we can say that this is a situational relative clause. Okay. So, and we are now done with what was that? With relative clauses as well. And the next grammar, or the next grammatical topic we have in here is called second conditionals. So, now what are second conditionals? Let's talk about it, guys. So the second conditional is used to talk about unreal, okay, unreal or unlikely situations in the present, okay. You can talk about unreal or unlikely situations in the present, or even in the future, okay. So this is something to note. And it can also talk about their possible results, which of course it should. For example, if I had, okay, if I had, so that's the point. If I had $1 million, I would travel around the world. Now, what is the meaning behind this? Why is it unreal, or at least why is it unlikely? It's because I don't have $1 million. Okay, so this is an unreal situation. And the other example, If you studied harder, you would pass the exam. Now, why am I saying this one? Because for sure, studying harder is not an unreal situation. But the point is that you don't study hard enough. And I know this because, maybe I know you. So this is kind of an unlikely situation. I know it will not happen, or at least the chance of it happening is not that high. So we call it unlikely. And the structure is really, really important to know in the conditional. So let's go over the structure. The structure of the second conditional, guys, is if plus the past simple. So if I just bring it for you in here as well, if I were you, if I were you. So just look at this. Were is the past simple for us, and we just focus on it, and we can remember that. And I is of course the subject and stuff, but we don't really care about that right now. We care about the if. So we can say that the if clause is using the past simple. So that's what this structure is also telling us. And then of course, if you're bringing it at the beginning, you need a comma after it. So we have our comma, and then it continues. In the main clause, you're using would, but plus an infinitive. Would plus a verb number one, if you will. And sometimes we can use were instead of was with I, he, she, and it as well. So it is more, let's say, how can I make it easier? Um, you can use were kind of every time instead of was as well. It will be correct, but it doesn't have a big difference. But the small difference is that if you're using were, it's more of a hypothetical situation, unreal in this case, and was, use it with actual things that actually happened. Okay? So, for example, if I were you, I would quit my job. So, okay, this was the main clause, would plus the infinitive, or would plus verb number one. I would quit that job. This is more formal than if I was you, and also we use it because it's unreal. It is unreal for me to be you, because come on, how is that possible for me to be another person, right? So this is unreal. Okay, another example. If she were rich, she would buy a bigger house. This is again more formal, instead of saying she was rich. And again, it's unreal because she's not rich at the moment, so we're gonna say that. And the point here, sorry for me, sorry that I digressed over just talking about were and was, but the point is learning that we're using past simple as well in here. So see, look at this one. If I had $1,000,000, had becomes your past simple. And the same goes for here. If you studied, so studied is again past simple. Okay? So you have the past simple in the if clause, and you have would plus the infinitive used in the main clause as well. So this is the second conditional. It just talks about unreal and unlikely situations in the present or even in the future and their results. So moving on to the third conditional and the last grammar topic of this video. So the third conditional, guys, is used to talk about unreal situations. Okay, first thing we have to put that, right? It's talking about unreal situations. But when? In the past. So it does this in the past, right? It talks about these things in the past and their imaginary results. So if it's talking about, I mean, this is kind of expected. If it's talking about unreal situations in the past, so of course the point is that their results will be imaginary, right? If you're changing something in the past in your imagination, so the result will also be in the imagination, because you kind of cannot change anything in the past, at least based on our current understandings of physics. So for example, if I say that if I had studied harder, if I had studied harder, so this is the if clause, and we will talk about the verb form. You might have already guessed that this is past perfect, by the way. I would have passed the exam. So what does it mean? It means that I didn't study hard enough, so I failed the exam. This is an unreal situation in the past. Okay, so I'm not changing it now. I cannot change it now. Or second example, if you had told, okay, if you had told me the truth, so this is another verb form, I wouldn't have been angry. Again, you didn't tell me the truth, so I was angry at that time. This is again an imaginary result of a past situation, an unchangeable past situation. So what is now the structure? So the structure of the third conditional, guys, is using if in the if clause plus the past perfect. As you can see in here, had verb 3, had verb 3. And in the main clause, actually, guys, we're using would, but not would alone. We're using would and have this time plus a verb number 3. Okay, so would and have, so like this, would and have, plus a past participle or verb number 3 like past or been. For example, as we have it in below as well, if we had taken a taxi, we wouldn't have missed a plane. But the point is that you didn't take a taxi and you missed a plane. And the last example as well, she would have been happier if she had married him. But the point is that she didn't marry him, so she wasn't, and may even be currently not happy. So that's the meaning. She didn't marry him, so she wasn't happy. She would have been happier, by the way, if she had married him. So these examples, guys, are all just, showing and indicating the fact that the situations we're talking about are unreal. They are maybe in the past, so not maybe, they must be in the past, unchangeable past events, and now we're talking about their imaginary results. Like, if you had told me the truth, I wouldn't have been angry. So, me not being angry is now an imaginary situation or an imaginary result as well. So, very, very easy, third conditional as well. So, if you do have any questions, of course, leave them in the comments or just contact me. And I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye for now.